Emily Hawthorne walked into that gathering the way a person walks into their own burial. Chin lifted, spine straight, heart hammering so hard she could feel it behind her eyes. She had told herself she wouldn't flinch. Not tonight. Not in front of these people. She had pressed her father's last letter against her chest that morning, until the paper went soft from the heat of her palm. Then she had put on her mother's best dress, pinned back her hair, and walked straight into the lion's den. If this story moves something deep inside you, stay with us until the very end. And drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story travels. Emily heard the whispers before she'd even handed off her cloak. They started low, the kind of low that isn't really low at all, just loud enough to reach the intended ears. A woman's voice, sharp and practiced, cut clean through the warmth of the entrance hall. "That's her, Thomas Hawthorne's daughter." Another voice, closer. "The man who nearly sold naval intelligence to the British. And she has the audacity to show her face here?" Emily didn't stop walking. She had rehearsed this. She had stood in front of the cracked mirror in her father's study every single morning for 3 weeks, and rehearsed exactly what her face would do when this happened. Neutral. Dignified. Not a flicker. Her father had not sold anything to anyone. Thomas Hawthorne had spent 31 years in the service of this country, as a diplomat, a translator, an envoy who had walked into foreign courts when no one else would go. And 4 months ago, a man whose name Emily was still learning the full shape of had forged documents, manufactured evidence, and watched from a comfortable distance while Thomas Hawthorne's name was dragged through every drawing room in Washington City. Miss Hawthorne, her distant cousin Margaret Ashford, appeared at her elbow, pressing gloved fingers into Emily's arm with the kind of urgency that meant, "Behave. You don't have to smile, but you do have to breathe." "I'm breathing." "You look like you're calculating how to dismantle someone." "I'm doing both at once." Emily lifted her chin a fraction higher. "Where is he?" Margaret's grip tightened. "Emily, I am not here to cause a scene, Margaret. I am here because you said his signature on a letter of endorsement could clear my father's name with a congressional committee. So where is Hunter Collins?" The pause that followed told Emily everything about how complicated this evening was going to be. "He's..." Margaret glanced across the room. "He's near the east fireplace. But I should warn you, he has already been told about your father. Senator Whitmore got to him first." "Of course he did." Emily exhaled through her nose. "Whitmore has been 2 steps ahead of me since the beginning." "What exactly did he tell Mr. Collins?" "I don't know the specifics, but Hunter Collins has not built what he's built by attaching his name to controversy. Emily, please, let me speak to him first. Let me arrange a proper introduction." "There is no proper introduction when a man already believes you're the daughter of a traitor." Emily smoothed the front of her dress once, a single composed motion. "The only introduction that matters now is the one I give myself." She walked toward the east side of the room. She heard a woman laugh somewhere behind her, one of those pointed, theatrical laughs designed to travel. She kept walking. She passed a cluster of gentlemen who fell suddenly silent as she moved through their periphery. She kept walking. And then she saw him. Hunter Collins was not what she had expected. She wasn't sure what she'd expected. Something colder, maybe, or more obviously cruel. But the man standing near the fireplace with a glass in his hand and his back partially turned toward the room was simply tall, broad-shouldered, and still in the way that powerful men often are. Still, and watching everything. He turned before she reached him. Not all the way. Just enough to mark her approach with a kind of sideways attention that was somehow worse than being looked at directly. Emily stopped 3 feet from him. "Mr. Collins." "Miss Hawthorne." His voice was even, Measured. He looked at her the way a man looks at a problem he's already decided isn't worth solving. I was told you might come tonight. Then I've saved you the inconvenience of being surprised. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, something adjacent to one. Senator Whitmore described you as bold. Senator Whitmore describes anyone who contradicts him as bold. It's his way of sounding complimentary while meaning something else entirely. She held his gaze. I'm not here to fence with you, Mr. Collins. I'm here to ask for something specific and give you something specific in return. And what could you possibly have to offer me, Miss Hawthorne? The question wasn't unkind exactly. It was something worse. Indifferent. He set his glass down on the mantel beside him, and that small gesture somehow communicated everything. The conversation, in his mind, was already over. Your father's reputation is in ruins. Your family's connections are dissolving by the week. I'm told the Hawthorne estate will be liquidated before spring. What exactly is it that you think you have to trade? The room around them had gone quieter. Not silent, but the particular quiet of people who have stopped their own conversations to listen to someone else's. Emily felt every pair of eyes on the back of her neck. She felt the heat of them. And she felt something else. The cold, clarifying anger that had been building in her chest for 4 months. The kind of anger that doesn't make you loud, but makes you very, very precise. My father served this country for 3 decades, she said. He negotiated the Aiken Trade Accord when no one else in this city spoke fluent enough French to manage it. He prevented what would have been a catastrophic diplomatic rupture with Spain in 1809 because he was the only man in the room who understood both sides of what was being said. He has given more to this republic than most men in this room combined. She paused. And he has never, not once, betrayed it. Hunter Collins looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, That is a daughter's faith, Miss Hawthorne, not evidence. The quiet in the room deepened. I have evidence, Emily said, which is what I am offering you. That stopped him. His eyes sharpened slightly. The first real flicker of attention she'd seen from him since she walked up. Evidence of what, precisely? Evidence that the documents used to condemn my father were forged. Evidence of who forged them, and evidence of why, which I suspect will interest you considerably more than the forgery itself. She held perfectly still. The same man who destroyed my father has been quietly acquiring contracts in this city for the past 2 years. Military supply contracts. He's been underbidding legitimate contractors, winning awards, and delivering 1/3 of what's promised. The remaining funds go somewhere that no public ledger records. She watched his face. I believe you have bid against this man 3 times in the past 18 months, Mr. Collins, and lost all 3 bids despite your proposals being demonstrably superior in scope and price. The silence now was complete. Hunter Collins picked his glass back up. His jaw worked slightly. You've done considerable research for someone with no resources and no standing. My father taught me 6 languages, Mr. Collins. He also taught me how to read what's in front of me. Her voice didn't waver. I don't need standing. I need someone with enough influence to take this information to the right people and ensure it isn't buried. That is what I'm asking you for. Not charity, not sympathy. A transaction. He studied her. The fire crackled behind him. Somewhere to Emily's left, a woman had stopped pretending to look at a painting and was watching them openly. Hunter Collins tilted his head. 6 languages. English, French, Spanish, Russian, Italian, and Latin. You're fluent in Russian? Fluent enough to have translated 3 separate diplomatic correspondences for the State Department before my father's arrest stripped me of my position. She kept her voice completely level. My Russian is better than any translator currently employed in this city. I know that because I've read their work. For the first time, something real crossed his face. She couldn't name it exactly. It wasn't admiration, not yet, and it wasn't warmth. But it was the look of a man recalculating, and then Senator Whitmore appeared at Hunter's shoulder. He was a compact man, early 50s, with the face of someone who had learned long ago that smiling could be used as a weapon. He smiled now, directly at Emily. "Miss Hawthorne, what a surprise." He didn't look surprised at all. "I hope you haven't been bending Hunter's ear with your father's troubles. He has enough on his plate this evening without—" "She wasn't," Hunter spoke without looking at Whitmore. He was still watching Emily. "We were having a conversation." Whitmore's smile held. "Of course. Well," he rested a hand on Hunter's arm, the practiced ease of a man accustomed to steering other men. "There are a few people who've been waiting to speak with you about the Chesapeake proposal. If you'll excuse yourself." "In a moment." Hunter still didn't move. Whitmore's eyes cut to Emily. The smile didn't change, but something behind it did. "Miss Hawthorne, I'm sure you understand that Mr. Collins is a very busy man. This really isn't the appropriate venue for—" "For what, Senator?" Emily asked. "For a straightforward business conversation?" "For airing personal grievances." The smile went a shade cooler. "Your father made choices. The consequences of those choices are a matter for the courts, not for—" "My father made no choices that harmed this country," Emily said. "The choices that harmed him were made by someone else. Someone with very good reason to want him silenced before he could finish the report he was preparing for the Secretary of State." She paused, and she let the pause sit long enough for everyone within 10 feet to feel it. Someone who knew exactly what was in that report. Whitmore laughed, light, easy, dismissive. "This is what I warned you about, Hunter. The Hawthorns have always been—" "What's in the report?" Hunter asked. The question was directed at Emily. Whitmore stopped laughing. Emily held Hunter Collins' gaze and said quietly, "Evidence of a supply fraud scheme that has cost the U.S. Army approximately $40,000 over the past 2 years. Falsified manifests, bribed procurement officers, and a paper trail that leads eventually to a silent partner whose name would make this room very uncomfortable." She paused once more. "My father was preparing to deliver that report the week he was arrested." The air in that corner of the room had gone very, very still. Whitmore's voice came out measured and smooth as oil on water. "Hunter, this girl is desperate and she is lying. Her father is a convicted traitor and she's willing to say anything to save him. Don't—" "I want to see the evidence," Hunter said. 3 words. Quiet, absolute. Whitmore's mouth closed. Hunter Collins turned to look at the older man, and something passed between them. A long, complicated look that Emily couldn't fully read. Then Hunter turned back to her. "Not tonight," he said. "Tonight is not the place. But you'll come to my office. Monday morning, 9 o'clock. Bring everything you have." He picked up his glass again, the conversation apparently concluded from his side. "And Miss Hawthorne." He looked at her one final time. "If you're wasting my time, I will make certain you know it." "If I'm wasting your time," Emily said, "I give you full permission to say so." She turned and walked back toward Margaret, and she kept her breathing absolutely even the entire way across that room. She didn't let herself feel anything until Margaret caught her by both elbows and leaned close. "What happened? What did you say to him? What did Whitmore—" "Emily, your hands are shaking." "My hands are not shaking." They were, slightly. She pressed them flat against her skirt. "He agreed to a meeting." Margaret stared at her. Hunter Collins agreed to a meeting. "Monday, 9 o'clock." Emily exhaled. Something in her chest was still pulled wire tight. It's not enough. It's not anywhere near enough yet. But it's a door. Emily. Margaret's voice had gone strange. Careful. Whitmore is going to know what you said to him tonight. He is going to know everything by morning. I know. Emily looked back across the room, just once. Hunter Collins had moved away from the fireplace. Whitmore stood exactly where he'd been, and he was watching her with that same smile. And the smile hadn't reached his eyes since long before she'd walked up. I've been moving in the dark for 4 months, she said. I expected it would stay dark for a while yet. You're not frightened? Emily thought about her father's last letter, the way the handwriting had trembled in the places where he was working hardest to keep it from trembling. She thought about the cell he was in, and the way he had written, I trust you, Emily. I trust you to find what I could not finish. I am absolutely terrified, she said. But terrified and stopped are not the same thing. She was still telling herself that 2 hours later, when the event had thinned to its later, looser hour, and Emily had retreated to a quieter corridor to collect herself. She'd been standing there no more than 5 minutes when she heard voices coming from the room at the end of the hall, a door left not quite closed. One of the voices was speaking French, rapid, clipped Parisian French, the kind used by men who assumed no one in an American drawing room would understand them. Emily went still. The second voice was speaking Russian. Her pulse kicked hard. She moved closer to the door without thinking, the instinct of 20 years of language study moving her feet before her mind had fully decided to follow. The French voice said, sharp and low, "The schedule cannot be changed. If the ambassador does not have confirmation before Thursday, the entire arrangement collapses. Do you understand what I am telling you?" The Russian voice responded, and Emily's blood went cold. She understood every word. She understood what arrangement they were describing. She understood what Thursday meant. And she understood, with a particular sick certainty of someone who has been carrying a puzzle for months and has just found the piece that makes the whole picture visible, exactly whose name was at the center of it. She pressed herself flat against the wall and stood absolutely still, listening, translating silently and perfectly, until the voices stopped and the door swung open and 2 men in evening coats walked past her without a second glance. Emily stood in the corridor for a long moment after they were gone. Then she turned around and went to find Hunter Collins. She found him near the entrance, reaching for his coat. He saw her coming, and his expression shifted, not into warmth, not yet, but into that same sharp attention she'd seen earlier. He waited. She stopped in front of him and said, in a voice low enough that only he could hear, "I need you to listen to me very carefully, Mr. Collins, and I need you to believe what I'm about to tell you." He studied her face. Something in her expression must have told him this was not theater, because the slight edge of skepticism that had been sitting around his jaw all evening went away. "Tell me," he said. Emily looked at him. She thought of her father. She thought of everything that had been taken, and everything that could still be lost, and every language she'd ever learned, and every document she'd ever translated, and every sleepless night she'd spent building a case from nothing but her own will and her father's faith. "There is a Russian diplomat in this building right now," she said. "And the conversation I just overheard in that hallway means that if someone does not act before Thursday, this country is going to lose something it cannot get back." She held his gaze steady. "I understood every single word they said, both languages. And I need you to believe me, because right now, I am the only person in this building who knows what is happening." Hunter Collins looked at her for a long, measuring moment. Then he said, "Start from the beginning." And Emily Hawthorne, the disgraced diplomat's daughter, the woman with no standing and no resources, and nothing left but 6 languages and her father's name. Drew a breath and did exactly that. Hunter Collins did not interrupt her once. That was the first thing Emily noticed. She had prepared herself for skepticism, for the slow, polite smile of a man tolerating a woman's hysteria before excusing himself. She had prepared for dismissal. What she had not prepared for was the absolute, focused stillness of a man who is listening the way soldiers listen when the information matters. She told him everything, not just what she'd heard in the corridor. She went back further, the way he'd asked, the way the whole thing connected. She told him about the 2 men, the French and the Russian, the arrangement they described in terms careful enough to be deniable, and specific enough that she had understood exactly what was being negotiated. A transfer of information, military positioning data along the northern trade routes, and a name, one name, spoken once, in Russian, with the particular casualness of a man who expected the other man to already know it. She told Hunter that name. His jaw tightened. Just once. Then it went still again. "You're certain," he said. "I am certain of what I heard. I am certain of my translation." She held his gaze. "I have been certain of my Russian since I was 14 years old." He was quiet for 3 seconds. Outside the entrance hall, someone laughed. A bright, social laugh from another world entirely. Hunter didn't look toward it. "The 2 men," he said. "Describe them." She did. Height, build, the cut of their coats, the particular quality of the French speaker's accent. Bordeaux region, she thought, not Paris, despite the clipped delivery. Hunter listened to every detail, and his expression gave away nothing. And when she finished, he looked past her shoulder at the corridor she had come from. "They're gone," she said. "They walked past me like I was part of the wallpaper. They didn't know I understood a word." "And you're sure about Thursday?" "Before Thursday," he said, "which means Wednesday at the latest." She watched him. "That is 2 days from now, Mr. Collins." He looked at her then, really looked at her, the way he hadn't quite managed all evening, and she felt the full weight of it. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't meant to be. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. The question surprised her enough that she almost answered it wrong. She caught herself. "Because you're the only person in this building I have any reason to trust even slightly." "That is a very low bar, Miss Hawthorne." "It is the bar I was given tonight." She kept her voice even. "And because what I just heard connects to everything else I've been carrying for 4 months. The same name that keeps appearing in my father's documents just appeared in that corridor, spoken by a man negotiating what sounds considerably like treason. I am not a person who believes in coincidence at this scale." Something shifted behind his eyes. He set his coat back down on the rack behind him. "You said a name," he said carefully. "One name. In that corridor." "Yes." "And that name appears in the evidence you've been building about your father's case." "In 3 separate places." Her voice didn't waver. "In the forged documents. I can show you the handwriting inconsistencies. In the falsified supply manifests. And in a letter my father wrote to the Secretary of State 2 weeks before his arrest. A letter that was never received, because I believe it was intercepted." She paused. "I have a copy. My father always kept a copy." Hunter Collins stood very still for a long moment. Then he said, "You've been walking around this city for 4 months, carrying enough information to destroy a very powerful man." "Yes." "And it hasn't occurred to you that that's dangerous?" "It has occurred to me constantly." Her chin lifted. "I decided it was less dangerous than doing nothing, and watching my father die in a cell for a crime he didn't commit." Another silence. This one had a different quality to it, harder to read. Then Hunter said, quietly, Get your cloak. Emily blinked. I beg your pardon? Get your cloak, Miss Hawthorne. We're not discussing this in a corridor at a party. He turned back toward the entrance hall and said something low to a man near the door. A servant or an associate, she couldn't tell which. And the man nodded once and moved off quickly. My carriage is out front. We're going somewhere we can talk without 17 pairs of ears. Emily hesitated for exactly 1 second. She thought about Margaret, somewhere behind her in the main room. She thought about the 2 men who had walked past her in the corridor, like she didn't exist. She got her cloak. They were outside and in motion before anyone managed to notice they'd left together. And Emily had the sharp, slightly unsteady feeling of a person who has done something irreversible and hasn't yet decided whether it was a mistake. The carriage interior was dark and smelled of leather and cold night air, and Hunter Collins sat across from her with his arms rested on his knees and said, the moment the door closed, "Start with the letter, the one your father wrote to the secretary." So she did. She had memorized it. She had memorized everything, every document, every figure, every date. Because paper could be taken, but no one could reach inside her mind and pull out what lived there. She recited the letter's key passages from memory, and she watched Hunter's expression in the low light, shifting from attention into something more concentrated, more alert. When she finished, he said, "He named the procurement officer." "He named 2, one of whom died in October. Fell from a horse, officially." The silence that followed that sentence was the kind that has weight. "Officially," Hunter repeated. "My father notes in a separate document that he had spoken to this man the week prior, and the man had agreed to testify. He was in good health. He was not a man known for reckless riding." She kept her voice flat and factual. "I am not drawing conclusions. I'm giving you the timeline." "The timeline draws its own conclusions." Hunter leaned back slightly. "Miss Hawthorne, what you are describing, if even half of it is accurate, is not a matter of simple fraud. You understand that. I have understood that for 4 months, Mr. Collins. I have been very careful and very quiet and very thorough, and it has not been enough. Because I don't have what you have." She looked at him directly. "Access. Credibility. The ability to walk into a room in this city and be listened to before I've said a word." She didn't let any bitterness into her voice, just the fact of it. "I have the evidence. You have the standing to use it." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're trusting a man you met 3 hours ago." "I'm trusting the information I've gathered about the man I met 3 hours ago." She allowed herself one small, tight breath. "You've bid against Harlan Mercer 3 times in the past 2 years. You've lost 3 times, despite superior proposals. You have approximately 40,000 reasons of your own to want to understand what's been happening with those military contracts." She held his gaze. "You are not a neutral party, Mr. Collins, but your self-interest happens to run in the same direction as justice, and right now that is more than sufficient for me." Something crossed his face. Startlement, quickly mastered, and then something else underneath it that she didn't quite have a name for. "Harlan Mercer," he said, and the name in his mouth had a particular quality. Careful, controlled. "You've been sitting on Harlan Mercer's name for 4 months." "Yes." "And tonight, in that corridor, you heard his name spoken by a man negotiating what sounds like the sale of military route information to a foreign party." "Yes." The carriage jolted slightly over uneven road, and neither of them acknowledged it. "All right," Hunter Collins said. He said it the way a man says it when he's made a decision and is done deliberating. "Here is what happens now. Tonight you go home. You do not speak to anyone about what you heard in that corridor, Not Margaret Ashford, not your father's attorney. No one. Tomorrow morning, before 9 o'clock, you send word to my office with a time you can meet that isn't the Monday appointment. We need to move faster than Monday." Emily's pulse jumped. "You believe me?" "I believe the architecture of what you're describing is coherent," he said. "And I believe your Russian is either exactly what you say it is, or you've constructed an extraordinarily elaborate lie for no discernible benefit." He looked at her steadily. "I'm proceeding on the assumption it's the former." "It is the former." "I know." He said it simply, not as a compliment, just as a statement of fact. "I've had dealings with the State Department. I know which translators they use. I know what the quality of that work looks like. And I know there was a junior translator named Hawthorne who was let go in September, whose work, by every account I've encountered, was significantly better than the people who replaced her." He paused. "I looked into your family when Whitmore mentioned your name to me last week. I didn't know then what I was looking for. I'm beginning to understand it better." Emily stared at him. "You already looked into my family." "I look into everyone Whitmore goes out of his way to warn me about." The corner of his mouth shifted. Not a smile exactly, but the edge of one. "He warned me about you 3 times in the last 7 days, Miss Hawthorne. That kind of repetition tells me considerably more about where the threat is coming from than it does about you." The carriage was slowing. They had arrived somewhere. She wasn't certain where. She hadn't been tracking the route. She'd been too focused on the conversation. "Where are we?" she asked. "My offices." He opened the door without waiting for the driver. "I have a file I want you to look at. Something that's been bothering me about the Chesapeake contract for the past 3 months. I want to know if you see what I see." She followed him inside, and the next 2 hours were unlike anything Emily had experienced in the 4 months since her father's arrest. Hunter Collins's office was a room built for serious work. Papers, ledgers, correspondence stacked with the particular organized density of a man who thought in systems. He pulled a contract file from a cabinet with the directness of someone who knew exactly where everything was, spread it across the desk, and stood back. "Read it," he said. She read it. He watched her, not hovering, just present, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. And Emily felt acutely aware of being watched, and pushed the awareness aside and read. She found the first discrepancy on page 4. She pointed to it without comment. He came forward and looked, said nothing, waited. She found the second on page 7. A figure that didn't reconcile with the delivery schedule on page 12. She pointed to that too. "Keep going," he said quietly. She found 3 more. By the 5th, she looked up at him and said, "Someone adjusted these numbers after the original drafting. The ink density is slightly different on the corrected figures. And whoever did it understood the document well enough to make the changes internally consistent. Except for these 5 points, where the original arithmetic bleeds through." Hunter Collins said, "I have had 2 accountants look at this contract. Neither of them caught more than 2. "I'm not an accountant," Emily said. "But my father spent years teaching me to read documents for what they're hiding, not just what they're saying." She looked at him. "This is the same technique used in the documents that condemned him. The same approach, the same internal consistency, with the same specific type of error in the reconciling figures." The silence that followed was the loudest one yet. "Same hand," Hunter said. "I believe so. I would need to compare them side by side to be certain. But yes." She held his gaze. "Mr. Collins, whoever constructed the fraud in these military contracts is the same person who constructed the evidence against my father. I am almost certain of it." He pushed off from the wall and moved to a second cabinet, pulled out another file, set it next to the first. "That's the second Chesapeake contract," he said. "The one Mercer won." Emily looked at it. Then she looked at him. "You've been building this too," she said. "I've been building something." He stood across the desk from her, and for the first time all evening, the distance between them felt like something other than social calculation. "I didn't have what you have. I had patterns and losses, and the particular gut certainty that comes from watching the same man win contracts he shouldn't be capable of winning. But I didn't have names. I didn't have your father's report. And I didn't have—" He stopped. "What?" He looked at her steadily. "I didn't have anyone who could tell me what language the other side of this conversation was being conducted in." He paused. "Until tonight." Emily set both hands flat on the desk. The paper was cool under her palms. "So we're in the same position." "We have complementary positions," he said, "which is different and more useful." She thought about what that meant. She thought about what a man like Hunter Collins agreeing to work with her actually signified in practical terms. Not just access and credibility, but protection. The kind of protection she had been operating without for 4 months, every single day aware of its absence. She thought about Whitmore's smile at the party, the way it hadn't reached his eyes. "He'll move against me now," she said. "Whitmore, after tonight. He saw us talking. He saw you take my side against him, and he's not a man who waits to see what develops." "No," Hunter agreed. "He isn't." "So we have less time than I thought." She straightened up. "Which means the Thursday timeline isn't just about the diplomatic arrangement. It's about everything. If Mercer and Whitmore move to complete whatever they're doing before Thursday, any evidence we have becomes significantly harder to act on. They'll have what they need, and they'll be protected by whoever they're delivering it to." Hunter was already moving back toward the cabinet. "Then we work tonight." Emily looked at the spread of documents across his desk. 4 months of near invisible work. The careful, solitary architecture she'd been building alone in the margins of a life that had collapsed around her. And now, suddenly, all of it visible, spread across a desk in the company of a man who was looking at the same picture she was. "Mr. Collins," she said. He paused and looked back at her. "My father is innocent," she said. Not as an argument, not as a plea, just as a fact that needed to be said out loud, once, in a room where someone was actually listening. "He has been sitting in a cell for 4 months for something he did not do, and he is 61 years old and his heart is not strong. And I need you to understand that for me, this is not about contracts or politics." Her voice stayed steady. "It is about him." Hunter Collins looked at her for a long moment. His expression did something complicated, and then settled into something quieter. "I understand," he said. And then, after a beat, "Sit down, Miss Hawthorne. This is going to take a while." She sat, and somewhere on the other side of that night, without either of them fully noticing the moment it happened, the arrangement between Emily Hawthorne and Hunter Collins stopped being a transaction and became something else. Something neither of them had a clean name for yet, and neither of them was ready to examine closely. But the documents spread across that desk told a story that both of them could read. And for the first time in 4 months, Emily Hawthorne did not feel like she was reading it alone. They worked until the candles burned low. By the time Emily finally stepped back from Hunter's desk, her eyes ached and her fingers were smudged with ink from handling document after document, and the clock on the wall read 2:30 in the morning. Hunter had sent his driver home hours ago and called for a different carriage, quieter, unbranded, the kind that didn't announce who was inside. He had said very little about that decision. Emily had said nothing at all. Some things didn't need to be spoken to be understood. By the time she was back in the narrow room she rented on K Street, she had exactly 4 hours before she needed to be moving again. She didn't sleep. She lay on top of the coverlet, fully dressed, and went through everything in her mind, organizing it the way her father had taught her. Not by emotion, but by sequence, by weight of evidence, by what could be proven and what could only be inferred. The French speaker's words in the corridor, the names spoken in Russian, the contract figures that didn't reconcile, the 5 discrepancies she'd found that 2 trained accountants had missed, and the letter, her father's letter, never received. The procurement officer who had agreed to testify and then died falling from a horse. She pressed her hand flat against her sternum and breathed. She had 4 hours. She used them. By 7 in the morning, she was at a printer's office 2 streets over, making a second copy of every document she possessed. Not because she distrusted Hunter Collins, but because her father had taught her that the most dangerous moment in any negotiation was the moment you handed over your only copy of something irreplaceable. She kept the originals. She sealed the copies in a separate packet addressed to a name she trusted absolutely. Her father's oldest friend, a retired judge in Philadelphia, who had been quietly horrified by the arrest and had no connection to Washington politics. She posted the packet herself. She watched it leave. Then she went back to K Street, changed her dress, and sent word to Hunter Collins's office. His reply came within the hour. 3 words on a plain card. Come now. Urgent. She came. The man who opened Hunter's office door to her was not the composed, deliberate person she had spent the previous night working alongside. Hunter Collins looked like a man who had also not slept, but where Emily's sleeplessness had sharpened her into something precise and contained, his had stripped away the top layer of his careful control and left something raw underneath. He handed her a letter without greeting her. This was delivered to my residence at 6 this morning. She read it. It was unsigned. It was also unmistakably a threat, worded with the particular elegance of a man accustomed to making threats that couldn't be proven as such. It referenced Hunter's pending government contracts. It referenced obliquely but clearly a congressional review that could be initiated at any time. And at the very bottom, in language so careful it made Emily's teeth ache, it suggested that certain recent social associations might give committee members cause for concern regarding Mr. Collins's judgment. Certain recent social associations. She was a social association now. A liability. Whitmore, she said. Whitmore. He took the letter back. He moved faster than I expected. He usually prefers to let things develop for a few days before applying pressure. He's frightened. She looked up. If he's moving this fast, it means what I heard in that corridor matters more than even I understood. He needs everything finished before Thursday, and he needs you out of the way before you can act. She held Hunter's gaze. He knows we left together last night. Yes. He set the letter down on the desk. I've already sent word to 2 men I trust on the committee. Before you say anything, they're trustworthy because they have direct personal reasons to want Mercer exposed. One of them lost a supply contract to Mercer's fraud the same way I did. The other had a cousin in the army who died using equipment that was supposed to be reinforced and wasn't. Emily went still. The falsified manifests. The equipment failures go back 18 months. I should have connected it earlier. His jaw was tight. I was looking at the money. I wasn't looking at what the money meant on the other end. She sat down without being asked. Something in her chest had gone heavy. Not grief exactly, but the particular weight of understanding spreading to fill new space. How many? 3 confirmed, possibly more. He sat across from her. Which means this is no longer a fraud case and a treason negotiation operating separately. They're the same case. Mercer has been selling substandard equipment to the military while simultaneously selling military positioning information to foreign interests. Your father found the money trail on the equipment fraud and was about to expose it. So Mercer had him silenced. He paused. And Whitmore protected Mercer because Whitmore is the silent partner, Emily said. The words landed in the room and stayed there. Hunter looked at her. What makes you say that? The letter my father wrote. He used the phrase silent partner twice, in the supply fraud section, and again in a separate note about political protection. I assumed it was a general term, but last night, going through your contract files, she reached into the satchel she'd carried in and pulled out the copies she'd made that morning. Not the originals, the copies. Page 9 of the second Chesapeake contract. The signatory for the political endorsement review is a firm called Whitfield Associates. Whitfield. She set it on the desk and pointed. My father noted a Whitfield Associates in his files as the entity receiving a percentage disbursement from the fraudulent contract funds. I didn't understand the connection until this morning. Hunter stared at the page. His face did something she hadn't seen from him before. Something that looked like controlled fury, the kind that had been building for a long time behind the careful exterior. Whitmore's wife's family name is Whitfield, he said. Yes, Emily said. It is. The silence between them lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then Hunter stood up. I need to make 2 more calls this morning, he said. Can you stay here? I'll need your reference copies of the committee's original contract approvals, she said. I want to cross-reference the signatory dates against the disbursement records. He crossed to the cabinet without hesitation and pulled 3 files. He set them in front of her. He looked at her for a moment. Something in his expression she couldn't entirely name. Something between professional respect and something older and less comfortable. And then he left the room. Emily worked. She was deep in the 3rd file when the outer door opened, and it wasn't Hunter who came in. It was a young man, perhaps 19, pale and slightly breathless, who stopped when he saw Emily and looked immediately uncertain. I beg your pardon, miss. I was told Mr. Collins, he'll return shortly. She looked up. You can wait. The young man hesitated. It's somewhat urgent. I work at the Harrington Hotel. I was asked to bring a message directly to Mr. Collins, not to send it by the regular post. He was twisting something in his hands. There's a meeting, today, this afternoon, at the hotel. He glanced toward the door as though checking whether anyone had followed him. A private meeting. French delegation, I think, from what I overheard. And a man I recognized from the papers. I think it's the Russian ambassador's secretary. Emily set her pen down very carefully. What time? 2 o'clock, miss. In the private dining room on the 2nd floor. I don't know what it's about. I swear I don't. But the men who arranged it paid our head steward a very large sum to ensure complete privacy. And the steward told me to say nothing, but... He swallowed hard. Mr. Collins helped my father last year, when he was in trouble with a creditor. My father said if I ever had information Mr. Collins might need, I should come. Emily stood up. You did the right thing coming. What's your name? William, miss. William Pratt. William, you're going to go back to the hotel, and you're going to behave exactly as you normally would. You're not going to speak to the steward about this. You're not going to tell anyone you came here. She held his gaze until she was certain he was following her. Can you do that? Yes, miss. Good. She pressed a coin into his hand, one of the few she had left. Go, and thank you. He went. Emily stood alone in Hunter's office, with the filing cabinet open and the documents spread across the desk, and the clock showing 20 minutes past 9 in the morning, and thought, very clearly, 2 o'clock. That was the meeting. Not Thursday, not Wednesday evening. Today. She picked up the pen and wrote a note for Hunter. Then she thought for 3 seconds and wrote a second note. Shorter, plainer, addressed to Margaret Ashford. She sealed both, called Hunter's clerk from the front office, gave him precise instructions, and then went back to the files. She had 4 hours. She used every one of them. Hunter came back at 11. He read her note first. She watched his face while he read it. And then he looked at her with that sharpened, fully present attention that she was beginning to understand was what Hunter Collins looked like when the stakes were high enough to strip away everything non-essential. "A 2 o'clock meeting," he said, "with the French party and the Russian ambassador's secretary." She set down the file she'd been holding. "I believe this is the confirmation the French speaker referenced last night. Before Thursday. This is the transaction." "We need someone at that meeting." "We need someone who can understand what's being said at that meeting," she corrected. "If they're conducting it in French and Russian, and I believe they will be for exactly the reason they used those languages last night, then a witness who only speaks English is useless." He looked at her for a long moment. She saw him arrive at the same place she had already arrived, and then proceed past it to the practical complications she had also already considered. "I can't walk a woman into a private meeting at the Harrington without—" "I'm not suggesting you walk me in," Emily said. "I'm suggesting you get me into the room adjacent. The private dining rooms on the second floor share a wall, and the ventilation is poor. I know the hotel. My father hosted diplomatic luncheons there for 15 years. The sound carries." She held his gaze. "Put me in the room next door. Give me paper and pen. I will give you a word-for-word record of everything said in that room." Hunter Collins looked at her with an expression she was starting to recognize. The one where he was deciding whether to say something and was weighing it carefully first. "This is not nothing," he said finally. "What you're describing. If anything goes wrong, if anyone sees you, if Mercer or Whitmore have someone watching—" "My father is 61 years old with a weak heart, and he is sitting in a cell because no one was willing to take a risk to tell the truth." Her voice was flat and absolute. "I have been taking risks for 4 months. I would like, for once, to take one that has backup." Something moved across his face. Something she decided not to examine too closely. "All right," he said. "Here's what we do." He arranged it with the thoroughness she was already coming to expect from him. A reservation for the adjacent room made through a third party. A reason for the reservation that wouldn't draw attention. A signal they agreed on if anything changed. Emily ate something at noon that she didn't taste at all, and checked her paper supply twice, and spent 30 minutes reviewing in her mind every diplomatic phrase she knew in both French and Russian. At 1:45, she was in position. The room next to the private dining room was small and overlooked a courtyard and smelled of beeswax and old linen. Emily sat with her back against the shared wall, paper on her knee, pen in hand, and waited. At 2 o'clock exactly, she heard footsteps. Voices, muffled at first. Then, as the room next door filled and the door was pulled shut, the acoustics did exactly what she had told Hunter they would do. The words came through clearly enough. Not every word, not the way standing in the corridor had been, but enough. Enough to follow, enough to understand. They were speaking French first. She wrote. The French speaker confirmed an arrangement. Delivery of documents. Not physical papers, but the transcribed contents of 3 strategic assessment reports prepared by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers on Northern Route fortification. The information was to be transmitted through an intermediary in Montreal. Payment had already been made through the same disbursement channel Emily recognized from the contract files. Whitfield Associates. She wrote faster. Then the Russian came in, and Emily's hand tightened on the pen so hard her knuckles ached. The Russian speaker. She was almost certain it was the same voice she'd heard the night before, the same cadence, the same soft Petersburg vowels, confirmed receipt of the partial information already transmitted. He raised a concern about a third party, an American who had been asking questions, a woman recently at a social event. Emily stopped breathing. The French voice said something dismissive, something to the effect that the woman was irrelevant, that the situation was being managed. The Russian pressed. He had been told the woman had certain language abilities, that she had been in proximity the previous evening. A pause. Then the French voice said, clearly, and with the finality of a man who was not accustomed to having his assessments questioned, "She is the daughter of a man in prison. She has no standing, no allies, and no one will believe her. It is managed." Emily wrote every word. The Russian let it go. The conversation moved on, back to the details of the transfer. Dates, amounts, the name of the Montreal intermediary. She wrote all of it. She was so focused, so deep in the work of listening and translating simultaneously, that she almost missed it. The small pause in the adjacent room, the changed quality of the voices, the slight shift that meant someone had moved toward the shared wall. She pulled back from the wall by 6 inches and went absolutely still. A voice, low, in English this time. "Is there someone next door?" Silence. Emily's heartbeat was enormous in her own ears. Then another voice, amused and certain. "Private reservation. It's been booked since this morning. Nobody in this city books a room at the Harrington to eavesdrop." Laughter, low and brief. Then the voices moved back to French. Emily did not let herself exhale for another 30 seconds. When she finally did, she looked down at the pages in her lap. 7 pages, dense with writing, her handwriting small and rapid and absolutely legible, because her father had spent years insisting on legibility, no matter the speed. She had all of it. She had the entire transaction, recorded in 2 languages, transcribed into English, dated and timed and witnessed. By herself, but witnessed nonetheless. She had the Montreal intermediary's name. She had the disbursement channel confirmed in the conversation itself, which meant it wasn't just documentary inference anymore. It was corroborated. She had Whitfield Associates named out loud in a room where treason was being negotiated. She folded the pages carefully, put them inside her dress against her skin, and sat quietly while the meeting in the adjacent room concluded, and the footsteps moved away, and the corridor went quiet. Then she stood up, smoothed her dress, and walked out. Hunter was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. One look at her face, and he moved toward her, with the particular directed urgency of a man who has been holding his breath for 2 hours. He stopped just short of reaching for her arm, checked himself, and said, voice low, "Are you all right?" "I have everything," she said. "All of it. Names, amounts, dates, the intermediary, and Whitfield Associates confirmed verbally in the context of the transaction itself." She kept walking, kept her pace normal and unhurried, and felt Hunter fall into step beside her. "And they know I exist. Not who I am, not where I am. But the Russian raised me as a concern. He'd heard about my language abilities from somewhere. Someone told him." Hunter's stride didn't falter, but something in the line of his jaw went hard. "Whitmore." "That would be my assumption." She kept her voice down. "It means we have less time than this morning. If Whitmore told the Russian about me, and the Russian raised it in that meeting, then everyone in that room now has reason to consider me a loose end." She glanced sideways at him. "How quickly can your committee contacts move?" "If I have them in a room tonight with what you just gathered, combined with the documentary evidence we compiled last night, They can petition for an emergency congressional review by tomorrow morning. He met her eyes. That freezes every pending contract associated with Mercer and triggers a mandatory disclosure order. Whitmore cannot shut that down without implicating himself in the attempt. Emily turned that over. The timing, the gaps, the things that could still go wrong. "There's a problem," she said. "Tell me." "The document copies I made this morning. I sent a set to Philadelphia, my father's friend. That's my insurance." She paused. "But the originals are still at my rooms on K Street. If Whitmore moves tonight—" "Then we go to K Street right now, and we don't leave the originals there." Hunter raised a hand toward the carriage waiting at the corner, the same unmarked one from the night before. "We collect everything. We bring it here, and we do not separate the evidence from either of us until it is in front of a committee member with legal authority to act on it." Emily looked at him. At the set of his face, the precise, controlled urgency of a man who had decided something and was done reconsidering. "You've shifted," she said, "from last night." He looked at her sideways. "Last night, I was a man evaluating a claim. A beat. Tonight, I am something else." She didn't ask what. She wasn't sure she was ready for the answer. But she stepped up into the carriage when he held the door, and she felt the solid reality of 7 pages of evidence pressed against her ribs, and she thought, for the first time in 4 months, that the thing she was moving toward might actually be possible. And then the carriage turned onto K Street, and Emily saw the light in her window. She had left no light burning when she went out that morning. She was absolutely certain of that. She had been conserving oil for 2 weeks. She had left no light. "Stop the carriage," she said. Hunter heard it in her voice. He was already leaning toward the window. "What?" "Someone is in my rooms," she kept her voice level. "There was a light in my window, and I left none." The carriage stopped. The night was quiet around them, the particular quiet of a city street in the small hours before the late supper crowds had dispersed. And Emily sat very still and understood with cold, complete clarity that the calculation she'd been making all day had just changed. They had stopped waiting to see how she moved. They had come to her. Hunter turned to look at her, and his face in the low light was very serious and very certain. And he said quietly, "Then we don't go in. We go directly to Judge Harmon's residence. Tonight. Now." He held her gaze. "Your father's friend in Philadelphia has the copies. We have the originals on you. And I have enough in my own files to corroborate the core of it." He paused. "The evidence survives, even if they take everything in that room. Do you understand me? The evidence survives." Emily looked up at her window. The light moved slightly, someone crossing the room inside. She thought about her father's handwriting, the trembling places where he'd worked hardest to stay steady. "I trust you, Emily." She looked away from the window. "Then let's go," she said. The carriage moved. Judge Harmon's residence was dark when the carriage pulled up, which meant nothing good, and Hunter knew it before the driver even stopped. He was out of the carriage first. Emily was half a step behind him, and she felt the wrongness of it the same way she'd felt the light in her window. Not one specific thing, but the accumulation of small things that didn't sit right. The house was dark, but not asleep dark. It was the kind of dark that had been arranged. Hunter knocked anyway, 3 times, firm and even. The door opened after a long pause, and it was not Judge Harmon who answered, but a young manservant with the careful, composed face of someone who had been given specific instructions about what to say. "I'm very sorry, sir. The judge was called away this evening to attend to a family matter in Maryland. He won't be available until—" "When did he leave?" Hunter asked. The servant hesitated 1/2 second too long. "Late afternoon, sir." "Did he leave word for Mr. Collins?" Another hesitation. No, sir. I don't believe so." Hunter stepped back from the door. He said thank you with precisely the tone of a man who is not thanking anyone for anything, and turned back to the carriage, and Emily fell into step beside him without a word. Inside the carriage, she said, "They got to him." "Removed him" is more accurate. Hunter's voice was contained and hard. "Harmon is careful. He wouldn't leave town voluntarily with something like this in motion. Someone made sure he was unavailable tonight." He looked at her. "Which means Whitmore already knows we were moving toward the committee. He's cutting off access points before we can use them." How many committee members can he reach in a single evening? Enough. Hunter's jaw worked. Harmon was the most sympathetic and the most independent. The others have varying degrees of obligation to Whitmore going back years. He paused. There's Caldwell. He owes Whitmore nothing. They've been quietly hostile since the naval appropriations dispute 2 years ago. But Caldwell is also cautious, Emily finished. I know of him. My father respected him, but said he moved like a man who'd been burned before. He has been. Hunter looked out the window. Which means he'll need more than what we have. He'll need to be certain before he moves. Caldwell doesn't take half steps. Emily pulled the folded pages from inside her dress. 7 pages, dense and precise, and looked at them in the low carriage light. 7 pages of transcribed conversation, plus the contract files, plus her father's documents, plus the letter that was never received, plus the handwriting analysis. Is it enough? She asked. Not to Hunter exactly, more to herself. But he answered, For any reasonable man, yes. For a man who has been hurt before and needs certainty, he paused. Almost. Emily looked at him. What's missing? A witness who isn't you. He met her eyes steadily. I believe every word you've told me. The evidence supports it. But you are Thomas Hawthorne's daughter. And in any room where Whitmore has had 30 years to build a reputation, that will be used against you. What we need is corroboration from a source that has no personal stake. Emily went quiet. She turned that over. A source with no personal stake. William Pratt, she said. Hunter looked at her. The young man from the Harrington Hotel. He overheard the meeting being arranged. He heard enough to bring us the warning. He heard the French delegation mentioned, the private booking, the large sum paid to ensure privacy. She held Hunter's gaze. He has no stake in this. His only connection is his father's debt to you, which actually works in our favor. It explains why he came forward without making him look like he was recruited. Hunter was quiet for 2 seconds. He's 19. And he works in a hotel. Whitmore's attorneys will dismantle him. Whitmore's attorneys won't get the opportunity if Caldwell moves before they can organize a counteroffensive. She pressed her point. We don't need William to testify in a full proceeding. We need him to give a sworn statement tonight, just enough to corroborate the meeting's existence and the unusual arrangements around it. That statement, combined with everything else, removes the daughter's faith objection. She watched Hunter's face. It makes me a witness with corroboration instead of a desperate woman with a story. The carriage was moving without direction. Hunter hadn't given the driver an address yet. It was rolling slowly through quiet streets while they figured out where they were going. Hunter leaned forward and rapped on the roof. Gave the driver an address Emily didn't recognize. Caldwell's house? She asked. William Pratt's address first, he said. I know where the Harrington staff quarters are. If the boy is there and willing, we take him to Caldwell tonight. All 3 of us, together. He paused. If Caldwell sees me arrive with both a corroborating witness and the daughter of the man he already privately believed was wrongfully convicted, It changes the geometry of the risk for him. Emily felt the plan take shape in real time, and felt simultaneously relieved and terrified, which had become her constant operating state over the past 24 hours. She pressed the pages flat against her knee. Hunter. It was the first time she had used his given name. Neither of them acknowledged it. If this works tonight, if Caldwell moves and the committee freezes the contracts, Mercer and Whitmore will know by morning. Yes. They'll know it came from us. Yes. He said it without flinching. Which is why we move tonight, and move completely. A half measure doesn't protect either of us. The only position that's actually safe is one where they're facing a full committee inquiry with documented evidence already in official hands. He met her eyes. There's no cautious path here, Miss Hawthorne. There's only fast or not fast enough. She absorbed that, nodded once. Then let's be fast, she said. William Pratt answered his door in a state of obvious anxiety, which told Emily he had spent the hours since their morning meeting reconsidering the wisdom of everything he'd done. He looked at Hunter Collins on his doorstep, and then at Emily, and his face did 3 different things in rapid succession. I wondered if you'd come, he said. His voice was steady, but his hands were not. You did right this morning, Hunter told him. I need to ask you to do right one more time tonight. What does that mean exactly? It means a sworn statement in front of Congressman Caldwell, tonight. Hunter kept his voice level and direct. You describe what you arranged, what you overheard, what you observed. Nothing more than what you actually know. No speculation. William looked at Emily. Is this... He stopped, started again. Is this going to be dangerous? Emily looked at this 19-year-old boy with his uncertain hands and his father's sense of obligation and said, with complete honesty, less dangerous than doing nothing. The men involved in this will not stop because we stop. The only question is whether what they've done gets answered. William was quiet for 10 seconds. Then he reached for his coat. Caldwell's house was lit when they arrived, which was either fortunate or suspicious, and Emily spent the carriage ride preparing for both possibilities. Hunter had sent a note ahead. She didn't ask how, didn't ask who carried it. Some things she was learning to trust without requiring the explanation first. The door was opened by Caldwell himself, which was the first surprise. He was a square-built man in his mid-50s, with a weathered face and the eyes of someone who had seen considerable political disappointment and stopped being surprised by it. He looked at Hunter first, then at Emily, then at William. You brought 3 people to my door at 11 in the evening, he said. I brought you enough to act, Hunter said. May we come in? Caldwell looked at Emily for a long moment. Something moved in his face. Not quite recognition, but proximity to it. You're Thomas Hawthorne's girl. I am, she said. I also have 7 pages of transcribed diplomatic conversation in 2 languages in my hand, a corroborating witness standing beside me, and documentary evidence of a supply fraud scheme that has killed at least 3 American soldiers. She held his gaze. I've been building this case for 4 months, Congressman. I would very much appreciate 30 minutes of your time. Caldwell stepped back from the door. They went in. The next 2 hours were the most precise and high-stakes work Emily had ever done, and she had once translated a 4-hour diplomatic negotiation in real time with 2 heads of state in the room. She laid everything out in sequence, not emotionally, not as a daughter, but as the translator and analyst her father had trained her to be. Document by document, discrepancy by discrepancy, the transcribed meeting conversation reading aloud, section by section in both languages, and then in her English translation, so Caldwell could verify that her rendering was accurate. William Pratt gave his account clearly and without embellishment. His hands stopped shaking about halfway through, Emily noticed. Something about being asked to tell only the truth, plainly, seemed to settle him. Hunter spoke to the contract evidence, the bidding history, the pattern of losses, the 5 reconciliation errors in the Chesapeake files that pointed to the same hand that had altered the documents used against Thomas Hawthorne. Caldwell asked questions throughout. Good questions. Sharp ones. The kind that tested the evidence from unexpected angles. And every time Emily answered, she felt him recalibrating. The way she'd watched Hunter recalibrate that first night. The slow, reluctant movement of a careful man towards certainty. At 1 a.m, Caldwell set down the last document and looked at the 3 of them. "If this is fabricated," he said, "it is the most elaborate and internally consistent fabrication I have encountered in 30 years in this city." "It is not fabricated," Emily said. "No." He looked at the pages. "I don't believe it is." He was quiet for a moment. The clock ticked. "Thomas Hawthorne spoke to me privately in August, before his arrest. He told me he was preparing a report for the Secretary of State, and that he had encountered some resistance to certain inquiries he'd been making. He asked me, in passing, whether I thought it advisable to involve the committee at an earlier stage." Caldwell paused. "I told him to go through proper channels. I told him to submit his report in the standard way." Another pause. He was arrested 11 days later. Emily did not let herself react. She kept her face absolutely still and held everything she was feeling in the place behind her sternum, where she'd been holding things for 4 months. "You couldn't have known," Hunter said quietly. "No." Caldwell looked at Emily. "But she could have spent 4 months wondering whether the people her father trusted were worth the trust." He held her gaze. "I'm sorry, Miss Hawthorne. For all of it. For the 11 days I cost him." Emily's composure held. Barely. "Help me get him out," she said. "That's the only apology I need." Caldwell nodded once, turned to his writing desk. "I'll have the petition for emergency committee review prepared by 6 a.m. The moment it's filed, the mandatory disclosure order activates, and every contract associated with Mercer freezes pending inquiry." He was already writing. "I'll need your transcription certified by a language authority, someone with official standing who can verify the translation." "There is a professor at Georgetown," Emily said immediately. "Dr. Fielding. He was a State Department translator for 12 years. He knows my father, and he knows my work. He will certify it." "Get him by 8 tomorrow morning." Caldwell didn't look up from his writing. "If I have that certification before the committee convenes at 9, we can move before Whitmore has any opportunity to—" The sound came from outside. Not loud, just wrong. The particular sound of a carriage stopping too quickly, too close, followed by a pause that had the quality of deliberate arrangement rather than coincidence. All 4 of them went still. Hunter was on his feet first. He moved to the window without touching the curtain and looked out with the sideways attention of a man who'd learned at some point in his life to check a thing before presenting himself to it. He turned back to the room. His face was controlled. 2 men outside, waiting. "Whitmore's?" Emily asked. "I don't recognize them from here, but they didn't stop at the door." His eyes moved to Caldwell. "They're watching the house." Caldwell's pen kept moving. "Then we don't go out the front." He said it with the calm of a man who had been in Washington long enough to have needed a back door more than once. "Miss Hawthorne, there is a passage through the kitchen that exits into the alley behind the house. My housekeeper will take you." He looked at Hunter. "You stay visible. Use the front door when you leave. They're watching for her. If you exit alone and in the ordinary way, they'll wait and follow, which gives her time." Emily looked at Hunter. Something quick and complicated moved through the space between them. "You're the decoy," she said. "I'm the person they're not worried about yet." His voice was steady. Go. Get to Fielding's house tonight if you can. If you can't, be at his door at first light." He held her gaze. "The certification is the last piece. Everything else is in place." She stood up. She gathered the documents, leaving the copies with Caldwell, keeping the originals. She turned toward the kitchen. "Miss Hawthorne." She looked back at Hunter. He didn't say anything immediately. He had the look of a man selecting carefully from too many possible things to say, and finding that none of them were quite right for the moment. "Be careful," he said finally. It was not what he'd been going to say. She was almost sure of it. But it was what came out, and she accepted it for what it was, which was not nothing. "You too," she said. She followed the housekeeper through the kitchen. The alley was cold and dark and smelled of horses and winter mud, and Emily moved through it quickly, with the documents pressed against her body and her breath making small white clouds in the night air. She made it 2 streets over before she heard the footsteps behind her. Not running. Walking. The precise, unhurried pace of someone who already knew where she was going, and was in no particular hurry because they believed she had nowhere left to run. Emily kept walking. She did not speed up. She did not look back. She counted the footsteps. 1 person, maybe 2, staying at a consistent distance, 30 feet perhaps. Close enough to follow, far enough to maintain deniability if questioned. She turned a corner and pressed herself flat against the building wall and waited. The footsteps turned the corner and stopped. She was looking directly at a man she had never seen before. Heavy-set, mid-40s, the careful, expressionless face of someone in hired employment. He looked at her with no surprise and no aggression, just assessment. "Miss Hawthorne," he said. His voice was completely neutral. "Senator Whitmore would like a word." Emily looked at him, at the documents against her ribs, at the street beyond him, quiet and dark. "I'm sure he would," she said. "He thought you might be more comfortable speaking in a private setting, to discuss a potential arrangement." The man's tone didn't change. It never had any warmth to lose. "An accommodation that might benefit your father considerably." And there it was. The move Emily had known was coming and had been dreading, not because it frightened her, but because it was the kind of move that required her to hold absolutely still against every instinct she had. The offer. The conditional mercy. The suggestion that there was a deal to be made if she was willing to stop. She had spent 4 months building an answer to this exact moment. She straightened up. She looked the man dead in the eyes. "Tell Senator Whitmore," she said, with perfect, composed clarity, "that the accommodation he should be considering is not with me." She paused. "By 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, a congressional committee will have before it a petition for emergency review, 7 pages of certified transcription, documentary evidence of a supply fraud resulting in American military casualties, and a sworn witness statement corroborating the existence of a covert diplomatic meeting conducted on American soil." She held the man's gaze and did not blink. "If the senator would like to discuss an arrangement, he should direct that conversation to Congressman Caldwell. I am no longer the relevant party." The man stared at her for a moment. Something shifted in his expressionless face. Not much, but enough. "You've already filed," he said, flat, testing. "By 9 o'clock tomorrow morning," she repeated, not confirming, not denying, just the deadline hanging in the air between them. He looked at her for 3 more seconds. Then he turned and walked back the way he had come. Emily stood in the cold alley and listened to his footsteps until they disappeared. And then she pressed one hand flat against the wall and breathed. Once. Twice. Her hands were shaking again. She let them shake for exactly 10 seconds. Then she straightened up, got her bearings, and started moving toward Dr. Fielding's address on the other side of Georgetown. She had 7 hours until 9 o'clock. She walked faster. The night was cold, and the streets were mostly empty, and Emily Hawthorne moved through them alone, the way she had been moving through everything for 4 months, with her father's faith pressed against her chest and 6 languages in her head, and the absolute, unwavering certainty that the thing she was walking toward was the truth. She just needed one more person to certify it. She knocked on Dr. Fielding's door at 2:15 in the morning. He opened it in his dressing gown, holding a lamp, with the sleep-creased face of a man who had been genuinely asleep. And he looked at her on his doorstep and said, with no greeting and no preamble, "Emily Hawthorne, I have been wondering when you would come." She held up the 7 pages. "I need you to read these," she said. "Tonight." He stepped back from the door. "Then you had better come in." Dr. Fielding read every page twice. He didn't speak while he read. He sat at his kitchen table with the lamp pulled close and his reading glasses on the end of his nose, and he went through all 7 pages with the methodical thoroughness of a man who had spent 12 years certifying documents for the State Department and understood exactly what was at stake in the quality of his attention. Emily sat across from him and did not rush him and did not speak, and held herself together by the particular discipline of someone who has been holding themselves together for so long it has become its own kind of exhaustion. When he finished the second reading, he set the pages down flat on the table and took his glasses off and looked at her. "Your French is flawless," he said. "Your Russian is better than mine." "My father taught me Russian himself," she said. "He said the State Department translators were too formal. He wanted me to understand how people actually spoke." Fielding looked at the pages again. This conversation, the portion in Russian where the ambassador's secretary raises the concern about a woman with language abilities. He looked up. "They were talking about you." "Yes." "Which means they knew you were at that party. They knew you had proximity to whatever was being negotiated." His voice was very measured. "Emily, these men know who you are." "I am aware." She kept her hands flat on the table. "Which is why I need the certification by 8 o'clock this morning. Congressman Caldwell files the petition at 9. Once it's in front of the committee, everything in those pages becomes official record. At that point, I stop being a threat they can silence and become a witness in a congressional proceeding." She held his gaze. "Right now, I am neither. Right now, I am a woman alone at 2 in the morning with documents that could destroy 2 very powerful men." Fielding was quiet for a moment. Something moved through his face. Not hesitation exactly, but the weight of a man who understood completely what he was being asked to put his name to. "Your father," he said. "Has he seen any of this?" "No." Her throat tightened. She pushed through it. "He doesn't know I've been building it. I didn't want him to. I didn't want him carrying the hope of it if it didn't work." She paused. "He knows I'm trying. He told me he trusted me. That's all." Fielding looked at her for a long moment. She had known this man since she was 7 years old. He had taught her Latin declensions at her father's dining table, and argued happily with Thomas Hawthorne about the deficiencies of the French diplomatic vocabulary, and once given Emily a very serious lecture about the difference between translation and interpretation that she had thought was tedious at the time and had turned out to be the most useful thing anyone had ever told her. He picked up his pen. "Where do you need the certification?" he asked. Emily exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. He wrote for 20 minutes, a formal certification in the precise official language of State Department verification, attesting to the linguistic accuracy of the transcription, his own credentials, his direct knowledge of Emily Hawthorne's language training and professional history. He signed it. He dated it. He pressed his personal seal into the wax at the bottom. He handed it to her and said, "Tell your father I expect him to argue with me about Voltaire when he gets out. I've been thinking about it for months, and he's wrong." Emily took the certification and held it carefully and said, "I'll tell him." She was back outside before 3 o'clock. She had 6 hours. She didn't go back to K Street. She went to Margaret's, not to involve Margaret, but because Margaret's house was the one place in this city where she could sit in a locked room for a few hours without anyone knowing to look for her. She left a note under the door, used the spare key Margaret had given her 2 years ago, went upstairs, sat in the small guest room, and did not sleep. She went through everything in her mind one final time. Every document, every figure, every name, every moment of the transcribed conversation at the Harrington. She built it the way her father had taught her to build an argument, not from conviction, but from sequence, from the logical weight of one fact bearing on the next, until the structure held its own shape without needing anyone to believe in it. At 6 in the morning, Margaret knocked on the guest room door and came in with tea and the particular expression of a woman who had found an unexpected person in her house and had decided to be pragmatic about it.
"You look terrible," Margaret said. "I've been awake since yesterday morning."
Emily took the tea. "Don't ask me what's happened. I can't tell you yet." "Is it almost over?" Emily thought about that. "One way or another, by this time tomorrow." Margaret sat on the edge of the bed. She was quiet for a moment. "I heard something this morning. One of the kitchen girls, her brother works at the Capitol building. She said there's been movement this morning among some of the committee staff. Early arrivals. People who don't usually come in until 9. She looked at Emily carefully. "Is that connected to whatever you can't tell me?" Emily's pulse jumped. Either Caldwell was moving exactly as planned, or Whitmore had gotten ahead of them. Both possibilities created early morning activity. She couldn't tell which it was from Margaret's description. "Possibly," she said. She set down the tea and stood up. "I need to leave." "Emily, I know." She turned at the door. "If I haven't sent word by noon, send a message to Hunter Collins's office." She watched Margaret's face go through several responses to that name. "His address is in the city directory. Just tell him the certification was completed. He'll understand." She left before Margaret could ask anything else. The streets were beginning to fill. The particular morning energy of a city waking to its own business, indifferent to everything Emily was carrying. She moved through it and kept her breathing even and arrived at Caldwell's house at 7:45. The door was opened immediately, which meant he had been watching for her. "Fielding certified it?" were Caldwell's first words. She handed him the pages and the certification together. He read the certification, checked the seal, and nodded once. A single conclusive nod. "Good. I have a clerk at the Capitol already. The petition is prepared. The moment I arrive with this certification, we file." He was already reaching for his coat. "My carriage is out front." "Has there been any movement from Whitmore's side?" Emily asked. "His secretary arrived at his offices at 5 this morning." Caldwell's voice was tight. "Which tells me someone reported to him last night. He knows we're moving." He looked at her directly. "Which means we have a window, and it is closing. Are you ready?" "I have been ready for 4 months," Emily said. They went. The carriage ride to the Capitol was the longest 12 minutes of Emily's life. She sat across from Caldwell and held the documents in her lap and watched the city move past the window and said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. Everything had been said. Everything had been built. What remained was the filing, and after the filing, the waiting. And after the waiting, either the thing she had worked for, or the proof that powerful men could not be held to account by a woman with no standing and a disgraced name. She had spent 4 months refusing to believe the second option. She refused it still. They were 50 feet from the Capitol entrance when the second carriage pulled up alongside theirs and matched their pace. Emily saw it before Caldwell did. She recognized the livery, not Whitmore's personal carriage, but the plainer, more deliberately anonymous vehicle she associated with political operatives who understood the importance of deniability. "Don't stop," she said to Caldwell. He leaned to the window and looked. His expression hardened. "Don't stop," she said again. "We are 50 feet from the door. Whatever he wants to say to us, he can say it inside in front of witnesses." Caldwell held her gaze for one beat. Then he said to his driver, "Don't slow down." They reached the entrance. They got out. Emily had the documents against her body, and Caldwell was moving with the directed purpose of a man who knew exactly where he was going. And behind them, she heard the second carriage stop, and a door open and a voice call out Caldwell's name. She did not look back. They went inside. The filing took 11 minutes. Emily stood in the clerk's office and watched Caldwell sign his name to the petition, and watched the clerk receive it and stamp it and enter it into the morning's official register. And when the stamp came down on the paper, she felt something in her chest release that had been wound tight for so long she had forgotten what it felt like not to have it there. It was done. It was in official hands. It was on the record. She pressed both palms flat against her thighs and breathed. Then Caldwell turned to her and said in a low voice, "There is one more thing I need to tell you. Something I received this morning that I didn't want to tell you until the filing was complete." She looked at him. "I received word from the prison warden at 4 o'clock this morning," he said. "Your father was moved to the medical ward 2 days ago. His heart." He held her gaze steadily. "He is stable, but he is not well, Emily. And the warden says he has been asking for you." The world went very quiet. She had known, in the abstract, that her father's heart was not strong. She had known it the way you know something you cannot afford to fully feel, so you store it in a separate room and keep the door closed and keep moving. Now the door opened, and everything in that room hit her at once, and she stood in the middle of a government clerk's office at 8 o'clock in the morning and held herself together by the thinnest possible thread. "How soon?" she said. Her voice came out completely steady. She was almost surprised by it. "The inquiry freeze activates immediately on filing," Caldwell said. "But your father's formal exoneration will require the full committee process. That takes time. Days, perhaps a week." He paused. "However, there is a provision for compassionate emergency contact while an inquiry is in active proceedings. I can have an order written within the hour that allows you access to him today." He held her gaze. "He doesn't have to wait a week to see his daughter." Emily looked at him and understood that this was the apology he had mentioned the night before. Not the words, but the action. The using of whatever power he had to close the distance she had been separated from her father by 4 months and 11 days and a cell wall. "Write the order," she said. He wrote it himself, didn't delegate. She watched him. When it was done and sealed, he handed it to her and said, "Go to your father. The committee will handle the rest from here." He paused. "You've done your part, Miss Hawthorne. You've done considerably more than your part." She took the order. She thanked him, and she walked back out into the Capitol hallway and stood for a moment just breathing, just being the person who had walked in with the evidence and walked out with the order, and let the whole weight of the past 4 months move through her like a wave and recede. Hunter was waiting in the corridor. She stopped when she saw him. He had clearly also not slept. His coat was the same one from the night before, and he had the contained, alert look of a man who had been moving since the previous evening and had not permitted himself to stop. He crossed to her with 3 quick strides and looked at her face and said, It's filed? It's filed, she said. Something moved through his expression. Relief, but not simple relief. Something more complicated that he didn't try to name out loud. Whitmore's attorney arrived at the clerk's office 6 minutes after you did, he said. He had a motion to delay the filing on procedural grounds. He paused. The clerk informed him the filing had already been received and entered. The motion was 11 minutes too late. Emily absorbed that. 11 minutes. The thread that the whole thing had hung on. "And Mercer?" she asked. "His offices are being reviewed as of 8:15 this morning, under the mandatory disclosure order. He is not yet aware that the Montreal communication was intercepted." Hunter paused. "He will be by this afternoon." She nodded. And then, because she was very tired and the wave had receded and left her with the particular hollowness of someone who has been running on urgency for so long that stopping feels like a kind of falling, she said, "My father is in the medical ward. His heart." She kept her voice even. "I have an order to see him today." Hunter went very still. "How serious?" he asked. "Stable." She held on to the word. "But I need to go." He didn't hesitate. "My carriage is outside. I'll take you." She looked at him. "You don't need to." "I know I don't need to." He held the door for her. "Come on." The prison was a 40-minute ride, and they made it in 30, and Emily spent most of it looking out the window without seeing anything, and Hunter spent most of it not filling the silence, which was the thing she needed most, and which she suspected he understood. When they arrived, she presented the order to the warden, and the warden read it twice and looked at her with an expression she couldn't entirely categorize. Somewhere between reluctance and a decency that had been working against the official posture of his position for a while. "He's asked about you every day," the warden said. He said it quietly, like it was something he wasn't supposed to tell her. "Since he arrived." She followed the guard down the corridor and heard the door open, and then she was in the room. Thomas Hawthorne was smaller than she remembered. That was the first thing. He had always seemed large to her. Large in the way of a man whose presence filled more space than his body occupied, whose voice carried, whose laugh came from somewhere deep and whole. The man in the narrow prison bed was still her father in every feature, but had been reduced by 4 months of a cell and fear and whatever his heart had been doing in the nights she hadn't known about. He opened his eyes when he heard her step. "Emily." Just her name. But the way he said it, the relief in it, the pure animal relief of a parent hearing a child step in the dark, broke something open in her that she had been keeping closed for 4 months. She sat on the edge of the bed and took his hand and said very quietly, "I filed the petition this morning, Papa. It's an official record. The committee inquiry is active. Mercer's contracts are frozen. Whitmore's connection to Whitfield Associates is documented and corroborated." She held his hand tightly. "It's done." "It's not finished yet. It takes time, the formal process. But the evidence is in official hands, and it cannot be suppressed." She looked at his face. "You are going to come home." Thomas Hawthorne looked at his daughter for a long moment. His eyes were wet. He didn't seem to mind. "I told them," he said. His voice was rough from disuse. "I told every person in this place who would listen. I told them my daughter would find it." He squeezed her hand. 6 languages, Emily. Did you use all 6? She laughed, a real laugh, the first one in a very long time, that came up from somewhere she hadn't expected to still have access to. 4 of them, she said. French, Russian, English, and Latin for fielding certification. Fielding. Her father's mouth curved. He certified it?
At 3 in the morning.
That man has always had better timing than he lets on. His hand tightened on hers. Tell me everything, from the beginning. So she told him. She told him about the party, and Whitmore's careful smile, and Hunter Collins at the fireplace. She told him about the corridor, and the French voice, and the Russian she recognized like an old, familiar tune. She told him about Hunter's office, and the contract files, and the 5 discrepancies that 2 accountants had missed. She told him about the Harrington, and the 7 pages, and the cold alley, and the man who delivered Whitmore's offer. She told him about Fielding at 2 in the morning in his dressing gown, reading every page twice before he spoke. She told him about the filing stamp coming down on the paper. Her father listened to all of it with the full, focused attention of a man who had spent his life listening to complex things carefully and had not lost that capacity even in the diminishment of the past 4 months. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Hunter Collins," he said. "Yes?" "I don't know him well. I know of him." He looked at her with the particular seeing quality of a father who has been thinking about his daughter's situation very clearly from a prison cell for 4 months. "Is he a good man?" Emily thought about how to answer that honestly. She thought about the carriage in the night, and the desk covered in documents, and the 3 words he had said when she told him to start from the beginning. She thought about him staying visible at Caldwell's front door so she could go out the back. She thought about him waiting in the corridor this morning, and the way he'd said, "Come on," and the 30-minute carriage ride to a prison where he had no particular business being. "He is a complicated man who has done good things," she said, "which is about as much as I think can be said for anyone worth trusting." Her father looked at her for a moment, and then nodded, with the gravity of a man who found that answer acceptable. "Bring him next time," he said. She looked at him.
"Papa?"
"I'd like to thank the man who helped my daughter." He raised an eyebrow. "Or is there a reason you don't want me to meet him?" Emily looked at her father's face, the sharp, warm intelligence of it even now, even here, and said nothing for a moment. "I'll ask him," she said finally. Her father smiled. It was small and tired and absolutely genuine. Good girl. She stayed for 2 hours. She held his hand and talked about everything and nothing. Fielding's argument about Voltaire, the copy she had sent to Philadelphia, the precise moment the wax seal had gone down on the certification. She made him drink the water a guard brought. She watched some of the tightness go out of his face as she talked, the particular easing of a man whose worst fear has turned out to be survivable. When she finally stood to leave, he held her hand 1 moment longer. "Emily." His voice was quieter now, tired, but the good kind of tired, the kind that comes after relief rather than despair.
"I trusted you with everything I had, and you carried it."
He looked at her steadily. "I want you to know that I know that I know exactly what it cost." Her throat was tight. She held on. "It cost less than losing you would have," she said. He let her hand go. She walked out. Hunter was waiting outside in the cold, exactly where she had left him, and he looked at her face when she came through the door and didn't ask any of the obvious questions. "How is he?" was all he said. "Tired," she said, "but himself." She stood for a moment in the cold morning air and let it settle over her. All of it, the whole weight and shape of the past 2 days and the 4 months before them. "He wants to meet you." Hunter looked at her. "Does he?" "He wants to thank you." She paused. "I told him you were a complicated man who had done good things." Something moved at the corner of Hunter's mouth, the closest thing to a full smile she had seen from him. "That's a generous assessment." "It's an accurate one." She looked at him directly. "You did not have to help me. You had reasons of your own that aligned. But at every point where it became more dangerous and more complicated, you stayed. She held his gaze. I don't take that lightly, Mr. Collins. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Hunter. She blinked. You called me Hunter last night in Caldwell's office, he said. I noticed. A pause. I didn't object. Emily looked at him. This complicated, guarded, principled man who had spent the night working beside her and the morning standing outside a prison because she had needed to go in, and felt something she had not allowed herself to feel for the entirety of the past 4 months. Something warm and specific and terrifying in the way that only good things can be terrifying when you've been in the cold for a very long time. Hunter, she said. He nodded once, settled. What happens now? The committee convenes Monday.
Caldwell says the formal inquiry will take a week, possibly less given the scope of documentation. Merce's attorneys will try to delay, but the mandatory disclosure order limits their options. She thought through the timeline she had mapped in her head, the way she mapped all things, precisely, practically, without sentiment. My father will likely be formally exonerated within 10 days. The criminal charges against him will be vacated. Whitmore will face a censure proceeding at minimum and a criminal referral at maximum, depending on what the committee finds in the Whitfield Associates records. She paused. Mercer will be prosecuted. The soldiers whose families received substandard equipment will at least have an answer. And you? Hunter asked. She considered that. I have no rooms on K Street anymore. I assume whoever was in my rooms last night was not there to tidy up. She said it plainly, without self-pity. I'll need to find somewhere to stay while the proceedings conclude. You'll stay at my townhouse. He said it with the same directness he used for everything. Not a suggestion, not quite, but also not a command. I have a guest suite. My housekeeper is there. It is completely proper, and it is also the safest place in this city for you right now, because no one is going to move against a woman staying under my roof while a congressional inquiry is active. He paused. It's a practical arrangement. Emily looked at him for a long moment. Is it? She said. Something moved in his face, quiet and careful and certain. It's whatever you decide it is, he said. Right now, it's safe. That's what matters. She thought of her father saying, bring him next time, and the way her father said things he knew to be true, slightly before other people had arrived at them. All right, she said. Practical arrangement. The corner of his mouth moved again. Good. They walked toward the carriage together, and the morning had gone bright around them, and Washington City moved on its ordinary business in every direction, indifferent as ever to the things that happened in its corridors, and its courtrooms, and its prison wards. Indifferent to the woman who had walked into a gathering 3 days ago with nothing but 6 languages and 4 months of careful, solitary work, and her father's absolute faith. 2 weeks later, Thomas Hawthorne walked out of that prison on his own 2 feet, with his daughter on one side and Hunter Collins on the other, and the Congressional Committee's formal exoneration in his hand, and the crisp January air of 1817 on his face, for the first time in 4 months and 11 days. He stopped on the steps, tilted his face up, breathed. Then he looked at Emily, and at Hunter standing beside her, and at the way they were standing beside each other. The particular quality of 2 people who have been through something large together, and have not yet found the words for what that makes them, but are no longer pretending it makes them nothing. And Thomas Hawthorne, diplomat, linguist, the finest reader of unspoken meaning that Washington City had ever produced, understood everything. He said nothing. He simply put his arm around his daughter and started walking. Emily Hawthorne had walked into that gathering with no allies, no standing, and no protection. Only the truth and 6 languages to tell of in. And she had brought her father home.